On the 26th of March 1971, the Pakistan government launched Operation Searchlight, beginning a military crackdown in East Pakistan, which is today Bangladesh. The aim of the operation was to stifle Bengali attempts to form their own state, and see the deployment of genocidal tactics to reach this goal. During the following war, thousands of Bengalis were massacred, with estimates as low as 300,000 and as high as 3 million. Based on the higher estimates, the Bengali Genocide of 1971 was the largest genocide since the Holocaust. In today's video, we will explore what led to Operation Searchlight, how many were massacred, and the consequences for the region. It is helpful to start with how the geographically and culturally different West and East Pakistan were formed. Following the partition of India, the new state of Pakistan was in a rather bizarre situation. The two regions of East and West Pakistan were separated by the huge landmass of the newly independent India, though geography was not the only thing that separated the two. In the West, it was largely occupied by Punjabis and Pashtuns, whilst in the East it was the Bengalis. Power was overwhelmingly held in the West, both militarily and politically. Despite there being a larger number of people in East Pakistan, they held far fewer seats in the parliament, and were vastly underrepresented in the armed forces. We do have a video on the Bengal famine that occurred during the Second World War, which highlights the region's importance in agricultural production. Much of the agricultural produce was diverted to satisfy the needs of the West, whilst little investment was pumped into the East. Much like how the British Empire exploited the region as a colony, so too did West Pakistan. Finally, Bengalis were treated as a lower class of people within Pakistani society. They were seen as a lower people, occupying a lower land, with dehumanization a common occurrence. In 1958, a United States military-backed coup was launched against what was seen as the weak democratic forces in the country. Soon enough, martial law was imposed, as the very machines of government were shifted over to the army. A presidential system was installed, with the position of the president held by the generals in the military. In December of 1970, the first general elections since the independence of Pakistan were held. The elections were seen as a contest between the two main social democratic parties. The West Pakistan People's Party, the PPP, led by Zulfikar Ali Bhutto, and the East Pakistan Awami League, led by Sheikh Mujibur Rahman. Whilst the Awami League was the only major party in the East, the PPP had to contest with a large number of conservative and Islamist parties in the West. The result was a victory for the Awami League, who won an absolute majority of 160 seats of a possible 300 available. The response of the president, Yahya Khan, was at first not to recognise the results, as it could not be tolerated that an East Pakistan federal government would be formed. Instead, Khan called on the veteran Bengali politician Nurul Amin, setting him the goal of reaching a compromise and allowing the PPP more power than had been afforded to them by the electorate. This politicking only delayed the forming of the new government further. All the while, unrest led by the Awami Party in East Pakistan grew in response to the elections being ignored. The Awami League, based on their widespread support in the East, unilaterally declared independence, whilst the West Pakistan forces declared martial law and banned the League. But by February of 1971, President Khan had already decided on the course of action that would be taken. He was quoted as saying, "Kill 3 million of them and the rest will eat out of our hands." A key turning point was on the 1st of March 1971, when the opening of the Pakistan National Assembly was postponed by President Khan. Groups of ethnic Biharis, who were Indian Muslims that lived in East Pakistan but supported West Pakistan governance, were attacked by Bengalis. By the end of March 1971, a total of 300 Biharis were murdered by Bengali mobs. These attacks would be used by West Pakistan forces as a justification for what would be named Operation Searchlight, which began on the 25th of March, 1971. The express goal of the operation was to eliminate the Awami League along with any civilians and military personnel who supported the Bengali self-determination movement. Key targets were members of the cultural and political elites, notably university professors and politically active students. On the first night of the operation, the Pakistani army struck a number of targets, including Dhaka University, the headquarters of the East Pakistan Rifles, and areas of Dhaka that had a large Hindu population. It is estimated that around 7,000 people were killed on the first night alone. This coincided with a number of foreign journalists being deported from East Pakistan in a bid to stifle news leaking to the rest of the world, though enough remained. Initial reports of the violence on the streets of Dhaka led to more journalists witnessing the horrors. One quote from the Times magazine reporter is as follows: "The soldiers set sections of the old city ablaze with flamethrowers and then machine-gunned thousands as they tried to escape the cordon of fire. Nearly 25 blocks have been bulldozed clear, leaving open areas set incongruously amid jam-packed slums." These types of clearances were commonplace, utilizing fire, machine guns and bulldozers to root out those who were supportive of Bangladesh secessions. It was not just Bengali secessionists who were the targets of Operation Searchlight. As early as the 27th of March 1971, Hindus were also massacred by the Pakistan Army. One notable example being the demolition of the Ramna Kali Mandir Hindu temple, where around 1,000 people, including Muslims, were massacred. It was commonplace when the Pakistan Armed Forces searched through a city or village that they would inspect men as to whether or not they were circumcised, marking them either Muslim or Hindu. As is far too often the case in such examples of violence, attacks on women and girls were commonplace. It is widely accepted that between 200,000 and 400,000 women and girls were subject to serious SA. Some were even kidnapped and held prisoner as so-called comfort women to be assaulted by multiple soldiers. Following the issuing of a fatwa declaring that the Bengali freedom fighters were Hindus and that their women could be taken as the booty of war, justifications for assaults emboldened many to commit serious attacks. This had the backing from a number of West Pakistan religious leaders. There are truly harrowing accounts of gang or systematic assaults on women, including one where a group of soldiers forced themselves upon a young bride in front of her groom. Such accounts of family members being made to watch the assaults were all too common. In light of the massacres, assaults and destruction of property, some 30 million people in East Pakistan fled their homes, with around 10 million seeking refuge in India. The exodus and movement of people was one of the largest in history, with a great many succumbing to illness and death as a result of the poorer conditions as refugees. The West Pakistan Army believed that any resistance to their operation would be temporary and minor. However, this proved not to be the case. The day after Operation Searchlight began, the independence of Bangladesh was declared by Sheikh Rahman, and this started the Bangladesh Liberation War. Bengali soldiers, along with civilian volunteers, started to defect and joined the resistance army known as the Mukti Bahini. The Mukti Bahini were often armed with weapons and additional training supplied by India. The forces were organized to act as guerrilla fighters, utilizing raids and ambushes, limiting access to infrastructure and isolating the West Pakistan forces. Whilst the guerrilla fighters did achieve some victories, they very often failed to make meaningful gains in offences that were launched. This would soon change when India entered the war on the 3rd of December 1971, following a preemptive attack on Indian airfields by Pakistan. With the groundwork set in place by the Mukti Bahini, the Indian forces were able to quickly outmaneuver the Pakistan forces, prompting their surrender on the 17th of December 1971. West Pakistan was left reeling for not only in their failed attempt to knock India out of the conflict, but that they had been defeated within 2 weeks. Khan's dictatorship soon collapsed, and paved the way for the head of the PPP, Zulfikar Ali Bhutto, to seize control of the state. As the West Pakistan forces retreated, a scorched earth policy was adopted, and in one final series of acts, they looked to kill thousands of Bengali elites. Doctors, engineers, writers, lawyers were all picked out in the final acts of the genocide. After the war, Bengali mobs would inflict their own reign of terror on Bahari villages, with hundreds of civilians killed in a grim echo to the violence during the genocide. Those Bahari militiamen who worked alongside the West Pakistan military were reportedly often killed by the Mukti Bahini forces upon surrender. The estimations as to the death toll ranges dramatically. At the top end, the figure of 3 million dead is claimed by the Bangladeshi government, a figure often attributed to Khan's quote that if 3 million Bengalis are killed, the rest will eat out of his hands. The lower estimates start at 26,000 dead, which comes from an official Pakistani government investigation. Third-party estimates too range greatly, from as low as 50,000 to as high as 2 million dead. There is, however, no doubt that atrocities were commonplace, including serious SA, deportation, and the slaughter of civilians carried out by the Pakistani army and their auxiliary militias. What is not often disputed is that these actions constituted as a genocide, both against the Bengalis and the Hindus of East Pakistan. For the countless women attacked during the war, there has been an attempt to reconcile the abuses inflicted upon them. One example being the Ami Birangona Bolchi, which translates to, "I, the heroines, speak." It is a collection of accounts and interviews with survivors, collected by Nelia Ibrahim. The work attempts to alleviate any social stigma the women might face in the society and to give a voice to the survivors in an attempt to heal. A link to the site will be found in the description. What cannot be understated is the role the Cold War played in the conflict. Khan's military regime was favoured by the United States President Nixon as a way to combat Soviet influence in the region. When Operation Searchlight began, the American consulate to Dhaka, Archer K. Blood, had borne witness to the massacres at Dhaka University. His telegrams to the White House even described what was occurring as a genocide, yet no denunciation was made by Nixon. In fact, during the conflict, weapons were still indirectly supplied to Pakistan by the United States, utilizing third-party countries such as Jordan and Iran as the go-between. There are those in Pakistan who have called for an unconditional apology to Bangladesh, along with an acknowledgement that a genocide took place, and some call for an independent United Nations investigation to be carried out. Whilst India did compile documents on those suspected of committing war crimes, these prisoners were exchanged with Pakistan by Bangladesh as a part of the Delhi Agreement, which sought to establish recognition of Bangladesh and facilitate the exchange of prisoners of war. In the 2000s, a number of men were convicted by the Bangladeshi courts for crimes that took place during the genocide, notably being Bahari Muslims. These men were all members of the Jamaati Islami Party, a Bihari Muslim group who fought alongside the Pakistan Armed Forces. These trials, however, were mired in controversy due to the political influence and that those facing trials were all members of political opposition. The West Pakistan military conflated the definitions of Hindu, Bengali, and Indian ethnicities, which resulted in all Bengalis becoming suspected of being a traitor. The tumultuous years following the breakup of British India were never truly healed, with resentments between the various states spilling over into the genocide in 1971. The Bangladesh Genocide of 1971 is not often discussed, though it is a subject that I would invite you to look further into. Links will be in the description for a number of sources for those who are interested to learn more.